today's episode of Best Friends at Work, Naomi, Mel, and I speak with Adam Lippin, the founder and CEO of hearme.app. We take a fascinating journey as Adam shares his personal story with loneliness that began in childhood and persisted into adulthood, leading him to shift his career as the founder of Atomic Wings towards mental health advocacy. During our time with him, Naomi asked a poignant question that prompted him to share some staggering statistics with us and a troubling trend around Gen Z that illustrates the urgency that leaders need to have.
What do you think the impact of loneliness is having on organizations, or how is that showing up?
Loneliness is linked to serious health conditions, heart disease, depression, anxiety, weakened immune system, even premature death, etc. People's health affects how they show up in a workplace. Demographically, to the point that we were just talking about, younger 18 to 22-year-olds, Gen Z, 79% of them feel lonely versus 71% of millennials, and the oldest generation feels less lonely, right? So that's fascinating, and that is a horrible trend considering the prior conversation we just had. So that's sort of the problems, and that's how it shows up in the workplace. And there are certain strategies that other companies have that I've utilized, and we've utilized in companies that I've run or had that can try to address some of this. But we're talking about really systemic, institutionalized, serious issues which affect how people show up at work. All of us have an experience. I have with an employee or a coworker that has had an addiction or an alcohol problem. We know how that shows up. It can be more visual, not always, right? There's a lot of silent sufferers, and there's a real effect on the workplace.
Stay with us today as we talk about the seriousness of loneliness and disconnection, its organizational impact, and effective strategies that can actually work. I'm Lauren Mask. Please join me and my best friends at work, Naomi Lippin and Mel Boyd-Brown, where we invite experts to talk about work, life, and leadership, and how to do them better. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you
Happy
guys?
Friday. How is everybody doing?
It's Friday.
Friday. Yeah, which just
Friday.
means I go to my second job, which means, I don't know, housekeeper, taxi, clean the house. Wait, I already just said that one. Oh, take care of kids, yell at kids. No, I'm just kidding.
If you have kids, you yell at them from time to time. That's just the way it is.
I call it loud encouragement.
Loud encouragement.
Oh, I love that, Mel.
I
wish I had known.
Loudly. Pick up your clothes.
I wish I had known that when my daughter was still at the age when I could loudly encourage her. Now I have to softly encourage her since she's out of the house and on her own.
I'm sort of in between those stages too, though, Naomi. I've got somewhere it's now suggestive encouragement. Like, I'm wondering.
That's right.
Why do I? Maybe this is my includer talent, or not includer. Sorry, my I'm thinking about our guest coming on today, so I got includer in my head. I'm thinking about activator. I'm still like on my 19-year-old.
Yeah, well,
at some point
we are who we are, Lauren, right? We are who we are.
We are who we are. At some point, she's gonna have to activate herself.
Yeah, they do have to actually do that. Yes.
While absolutely. I have to say, she has historically been very much on top of things. I think now, it's the college distraction of fun.
There's a lot for them to be like working through, right? And figuring it.
Absolutely. She had an interesting call with a friend of mine who works for a Big Five consulting. And it's what I find interesting though is that my friend says all the same things to Morgan that I say, yet my
Mm.
friend is so enlightened and so smart and so helpful. And I'm going, I'm so glad. Well, at least she gets it from someone. But they're of that stage now, right? Where, they're going to be learning from so many other adults than us. And I love that idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mel.
No, I was gonna say I do too, right? I think that's and I feel like that's such a natural developmental thing as well that I mean, I think it's that part of the process of identifying yourself outside of your family unit, right?
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
and so that's
Hmm.
um as parents, if we can view it in that filter, then we can just be thrilled that they're hearing the message, regardless of who the person is that's delivering it.
Yes, I agree,
Absolutely.
Mel. As someone whose daughter is 37, far older than either of your children, I will tell you that that phase that you just talked about, differentiating and creating space between themselves and their families, is critical to their ability to launch as unique individuals in the world. I mean, it's not easy. It can it can hurt, like
Mhm.
that letting go.
Oh boy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Been through it and continue to go through it because it's so interesting. It just never stops. It just changes, but it
Yeah.
never stops. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I find that really interesting. She's going through a lot of because the college year is she's a sophomore now, right? So it's just different now. And one of the things that she was talking about, which was I'm finding really kind of interesting because it's a interesting segue into our topic today, is that she's like, I just feel like I don't have an opportunity to be alone. I was like,
Mm.
wow, that's really interesting. And she brought that up just as I was going, we're about to have a really interesting podcast this weekend about something that's almost like the opposite. But, then one of the things is like, what's the difference between alone and lonely? Right.
Mm. Mm.
So I'm sure there's a huge
Okay.
distinction between that. Um, as we'll probably learn more today. I'm excited about our guest, Naomi. Can you
All right.
share?
So let me introduce our guest. It is such my pleasure to introduce Adam Lippin. And if you notice
Lippin.
that we have similar last names,
Well,
he's not
do
my
tell.
brother, but he is my cousin. Our fathers were brothers. So And really, I'm so proud of Adam. Adam is a purpose-driven entrepreneur and mental health advocate known for his contributions to addressing the public health crisis of loneliness, as we were just talking about, and disconnection, specifically through creating companies designed to address these issues. He's the founder of hearme. This is a company that provides on-demand peer-to-peer support for a diverse of individuals and organizations. Before founding hearme, Adam co-founded and served as CEO of Cudlist, a service aimed at reducing loneliness and enhancing emotional well-being. Adam started, hi Adam. Adam
Hi, Adam.
started his entrepreneurial journey right after college. He was the founder and CEO of Atomic Wings, a successful chain of restaurants specializing in chicken wings. So as we can see, has had a diverse set of career experiences that have shaped his entrepreneurial mindset and deepened his commitment to providing private sector solutions to the public health crisis of loneliness. Welcome, Adam.
Hi, Adam. Oh, you're on mute.
Adam.
Love
Nice
it.
to
There
see
we
all of
go.
you.
Hi, Adam. Lovely to meet you.
So
Lovely to meet you as
excited
well.
to have you here, Adam. We're so glad to get to know you and kind of bring you into our fold of our fun and exciting podcast, dedicated to, of course, creating great places to work through, as much knowledge that we can bring to the world.
Before we get started, I am so curious about your journey. How on earth do you go from atomic wings, which by the way, I love, to loneliness and being an expert in loneliness? I'd love to hear.
Um, Thank you. So my journey actually begins when I first sort of realized that I was gay, probably, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10-ish, right? And I knew at that time that I couldn't share it with anyone. And so I constructed sort of ways of being and acting to create a persona, essentially, right? And so that started very, very young, right? Fast forward, and that continued for a long time. Fast forward to when I was a teenager, I found this little book by Martin Buber, who is a Hasidic scholar. It's a little book called I and Thou. And essentially, the concept is there's little I, which is our individual self, and the big I, which is universal consciousness or God, whatever you want to call it. And according to Martin Buber, the only way to realize universal consciousness or God is through the big I, and you can only realize the big I in connection with another human. Right. So at that point, I realized that sounds very true. I totally get it. And I also realized that will not be available for me because I wasn't able to do that, right? Because I was hiding. So that's sort of the origin story, if you will, right? And so, I went through my life and I can tell you a lot of stories of loneliness and disconnection and feeling disconnected, less than, not seen, et cetera, which ultimately led me to two paths. One path was yoga and meditation and sort of the spiritual life, which was really great. The other path was addiction, which had its own story. At the end of the day, I realized there's a concept called spiritual materialism, right? Which means that for me anyway, I'm better than you because I can drop down in meditation and I understand shit that you don't understand, which led to further disconnection. Addiction, we all know addiction stories, which leads to further disconnection. So I realized, or through the process of this living, that these are not strategies that work, right? So basically at this time, I'm in my 40s, right? And I have a company called Atomic Wings. And at one point, sort of, I was opening a store in Massachusetts somewhere, and the role of a franchise, at this point, I was franchising, and the role of the franchisor is to be the cheerleader, right? Nothing is more important and better than this chicken wing restaurant opening in this town, right? And I felt dead inside. And I realized I need to stop doing this because I could care less if another chicken wing restaurant opens. I was tired of giving, people heart disease and diabetes, the whole thing. And I decided it was time for me to change my life. So I put the company on the market, took a few years to sell it, and I wanted to do something to address my original sort of feeling, which thus became my mission, is to address loneliness and disconnection. And so that sort of was the pivot, which led me to start Cuddlist, which is a professional cuddling company, which is still thriving. And the reason I started that, and I particularly focused on gay men when I started, because growing up in New York during the AIDS crisis, I saw people in my cohort, some men who became so lonely that loneliness would calcify into their being and they would like literally shrink. And you can see them sort of diminish in front of your eyes. And another cohort of men which acted out sexually for decades, right? And it didn't make them feel any better. They weren't even enjoying it. It just became this habit which allowed them momentarily to escape feeling really lonely. So I thought if I can create a situation where people can have platonic physical touch, it could be really beneficial. And Einstein said you can't change, I forget the exact quote, but you need to go into a different level of consciousness to change. And I thought that by having that kind of touch, then that can spark a change, or at least begin the understanding that something else is possible. During that process, people started to call and email. I don't have $80. I'm not near a practitioner. I just want someone to talk to. Also, during that process, I had this realization that hetero people are at least as fucked up, where they have at least as many issues, et cetera. So I started hearme, and that became sort of a more expanded version to be there to address loneliness, to see you, to hear you, and to validate you, not to try to fix you, not to solve your problems. For me, the solution is being there, right? Obviously, we're not solving deep issues, we're not solving clinical depressions, et cetera, but for many people, most people, just having someone to listen to unconditionally without judgment, being there for you is enough.
Right. And maybe that's at least the start, right?
Right.
To help people move in that direction. Because, you have to start somewhere. And for a lot of
Right.
people, that's probably a great place to start. Thanks for sharing your story. I'm really touched. One of the things that I would like to do before we kind of really deep dive into a lot of things that you know and you've learned through this journey is how do you define loneliness, right? How do you make that a definition? And we were talking prior to having you join us in the room. My daughter's, she's in midterms right now in college, so crazy time. And so then of course when you start to stress out, you pick out all the little things that don't really matter in isolation, but you add them all up. And one of the things that she brought up was, especially when you have a roommate in a dorm room in college, she said, I just need some alone time. And I thought that was really interesting. So I would love to learn what your definition of loneliness is, and also maybe a difference between alone and loneliness.
Okay, so I'm going to try something here. I'm going to substitute the word loneliness for disconnection, right? I think most of us can realize a sense of disconnection that we have with other people, and
I
there's
love
no
that.
stigma around it. I don't feel connected to these people. They're not my tribe. I feel like I'm at the wrong party, blah, blah, right?
Yeah.
When you say the word lonely to people, it's really hard to connect to that for some people because it has a lot of shame around it. But
Mm.
the sense of disconnection, I don't believe has that kind of shame or intensity. Yet I think they're basically the same thing. Because loneliness versus being alone, there are different personality types. I love to be alone. Like give me some, I'll lie on the couch, I'll take a hike. I love that, right? That's not lonely. And I hate the word self-care because it sounds just sort of like commercialized but that's
Still an
sort of,
important word,
I
yeah.
agree, that's what I love to do, right? And all of us have different levels or, needs for sort of stimulation, people, etc. So I don't believe alone is lonely. So basically it's an internal feeling. How do you feel? Are you, and again, if we go back to, am I feeling connected? Or am I not feeling connected? Because generally when we don't feel connected, we feel less than, we feel like there's something wrong with us. We feel, all the negative tapes just run through our head,
Yeah.
right? So if I was in charge, I would sort of change the word from loneliness to disconnection because I think it opens up an ability to have more of a conversation around it.
If I could just jump in there for a second, what I love, Adam, about that reframing is for me, it brought up this idea of a sense of belonging too, right? Which all of us can relate to, whether we feel like we belong or we don't.
Right. That's
Mhm.
the opposite of disconnection is a sense of belonging. And we all
Right.
want, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter who you are, what your background is. In general, we want to feel a sense of, we all have basically the same thought when we go to bed, right? We want to feel connected. We want to feel all that, forgetting about money and all the real life,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. We want to feel connected to our people. We want to
Mhm.
feel a sense of,
Mhm.
happiness that comes with that, or joy, or fulfillment, or whatever word you want to use.
Yeah.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, I think that sense of belonging can does happen whether you are alone or whether you're with people. The
Yeah.
same thing with that sense of disconnection. You can feel it when you're alone, or you can feel it when you're with a group of people. And probably it's worse when you're with a group of people
Mhm.
because you're like, I'm with all these people, and how come I'm still feeling this way?
Right. Because at that point, your social anxiety and dread are part of the picture. You're alone, you're with your thought. That's my experience. My experience is I have more dread and an uncomfortable, my prior experience. I've gotten a
Uh-huh.
lot better, but in general, I feel a lot more uncomfortable when I'm with people and feeling uncomfortable than when I'm alone, wishing I was with people.
Well, there's a
Understood.
certain safety when you're by yourself.
Right.
You don't have to put on a facade. You can, you know, go in the bathroom and do your ugly cry if you want. If
Right.
you're a bunch of a front of people, you don't have that opportunity. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And one strategy that I have that I found very, very helpful is, and it's so simple, it's so difficult. Say hello to someone. And, and I did this for probably 3 years. I would say to someone, I'd say, I'm saying hello, so I practice, and this is really uncomfortable for me. And I've never had an experience where someone didn't smile and open up. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying thing to do, but for me, it really worked. And it required a lot of, just do it, and just go now, that kind of thing, like that whole, you know.
I find that so fascinating because I am wildly the opposite. Like it's terrifying to not talk to somebody almost. And this isn't the conversation for that, but Naomi will laugh because she'll know why I am that way. Mel too. But I find that really fascinating. Anybody would be terrified to say hello to someone. I'm really interested in that. So yeah.
So, oh,
So
go ahead, Mel. No,
question,
go
I'm
right ahead.
so curious, Adam. Like we talk about how connected we are digitally now, and yet when you read all the studies, we talk about the fact that loneliness is increasing. What do you think's happening?
A lot, right? And I
In like a
think,
sentence or two.
I guess in a sentence or two, well, from being a father of a 21, I'll be 21 in January, and looking at his cohort of people, because of social media and the way their lives are lived, thrown a dash of COVID, they don't recognize a lot of basic social skills, and they don't see the importance of it. And it's a shift of how people's brains function, I think, right? And when you get conditioned, to create a character, some of us online maybe create more of a character, but we're creating almost an avatar of ourselves, right? For many people, that creates a sense of disconnection. So for me, being gay, blocking myself off, I think I'm not that unique, right? Everyone has versions of that story, I think, most people anyway. And I think that's what's sort of happening, that the way you communicate online, and there's that filter where you can sort of, play, where you can sort of, you're not necessarily, I'm not saying everyone, but I think there's a sense of, and I hate the word, but inauthenticity in terms of sort of you're not practicing connecting on a real level. And then that becomes hardened. That becomes sort of, the way you are. And I think those skills and that feeling is not helpful in general, in a workplace, in, IRL, in real life, et cetera. And I think it's creating a lot of issues and a lot of problems and a lot of issues.
That's a great segue into something that we wanted to ask you, which is connecting loneliness and how it shows up in the workplace.
Yeah.
So, right, based on your experience, what do you think the impact of loneliness is having on organizations, or how is that showing up?
So I'm gonna read just a couple stats from Cigna, which is an insurance company. Did a fabulous study in 2020 on loneliness in the workplace, and they did a follow-up study a few years later. Nothing improved. The report found 61% of employees in the U.S. feel lonely, and that's a notable increase from prior years. Impact is lonely employees are less productive, have higher absenteeism, and are less engaged at work, and they're twice as likely to miss work due to stress-relating factors, right? And it impacts their quality of work. Loneliness is linked to serious health conditions, heart disease, depression, anxiety, weakened immune system, even premature death, etc. People's health affects how they show up in a workplace. Demographically, to the point that we were just talking about, younger 18 to 22-year-olds, Gen Z, 79% of them feel lonely versus 71% of millennials, and the oldest generation feels less lonely, right? So that's fascinating. And that is a horrible trend considering the prior conversation we just had. So that's sort of the problems, and that's how it shows up in the workplace. And there are certain strategies that other companies have that, I've utilized, and we've utilized in companies that I've run or had, that can try to address some of this. But we're talking about really systemic, institutionalized, serious issues which affect how people show up at work. All of us have an experience. I mean, I know I have with an employee or a coworker that has had an addiction or an alcohol problem. We know how that shows up. It can be more visual, not always, right? There's a lot of silent sufferers, and there's a real effect on the workplace.
Mhm. Yeah.
You mentioned that like some organizations that you work with have done strategies that some have been effective, some have been less so. Can you tell us a little bit about the ones that have worked?
Well, again, just going back to some research. So Microsoft did a study on remote work, and they found that, and I'm going to stressify intentional engagement through scheduled check-ins, town halls, and ways that people can actually connect is very helpful. American Psychiatric Association said that there's a 23% reduction in absenteeism when there's real mental health initiatives that are marketed and promoted and that people actually use. Here's a wonderful one, employee resource groups. So those are different people, different identities and organizations that come together. There's a 40% higher job satisfaction. This is a Harvard Business Review for companies that really promote and engage ERG use. And the cool thing about it is you're sort of, the negative, people on the other political extreme might say, well, you're then identity politics and you're creating these different divisions. The reality is, according to Harvard, is that when people have that connection with people they feel safe with, it allows them to open up more to the entire community, right? And then Aon, the 12% reduction in employer turnover when there's a real quote unquote holistic wellness program. So there are programs that work. I won't say we're playing with margins, but even the best, so those are some of the big companies that have worked. I can share with you what we've done in my little companies compared to these, giants.
Yeah. Yes, do share that, Adam. We're really curious about what you've done in your companies.
So 3 techniques. One is a personal check-in. So if we have meetings, most of our meetings, 8 people or less. We spend 1 minute each at the beginning of the meeting, personal check-in. This is what's going on, my dog, whatever it is. It could be something silly, something fun, or something going on in your personal life. At the end of it, people thank you for sharing. There's no crosstalk. There's no sort of fixing, solving, anything like that. So that's one thing that we do. At the end of a check-in, that little personal check-in, people can state a block in their life. So if it's a personal thing, or my car broke down, I had to get a ride from my whoever to come to work. It's a real pain, or it could be a block in work. So, I need to get the report out to this client, but the dashboard's not working and the tech team hasn't fixed it yet. So that's one thing that we do. And then we have something a little bit deeper called the come clean process. Let's say Naomi and I are coworkers, right? Something's not jiving. We're not in complete hell, but we're not in flow. So and let's say my issue is with Naomi. I don't know if she has this issue back to me. I could say to Naomi, hey, Naomi, I have a come clean. Are you willing to hear it? Then Naomi would say to me, yes or no, because it's up to her or that other person to decide if they want to engage in that, right? So if Naomi says yes, I tell her the I statement, what I'm feeling, or what's wrong, and then Naomi can either share back or thank me for sharing, right? So it's up to the person, and that sort of can work a lot. That sort of can help for bad, not crazy, horrific sort of work issues, right? And then we have something a little bit deeper than that, and this is more for people generally in the same, and I hate the sort of stratification, but it doesn't really work as well if there's a pretty unequal sort of relationship, boss employee, this or that. But for us, it's called the sort of intentional dialogue, right? And this is where we have a half-hour time. And so Naomi and I, we didn't get any better, right? We're basically equals at work in terms of titles or the way people respond, whatever, right? I say, hey, Naomi, let's book 30 minutes. And I spend the first 7 minutes sharing free association of all the things I'm feeling around our relationship. Naomi then has 7 minutes to share back. Then the next go around is 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. So generally, it can be, within 30 minutes, people can generally be feeling better, or at that point you table it and you can decide to come back later. But you've given each other an opportunity. You're not arguing. It's often my perspective, and people share back and forth. Those are 3 things that I found that are free, that are, easy-ish to do. And that helps create, this culture of sort of connection.
I love that last one. It makes me think of things that I've heard about progressive schooling where there's a discipline issue, between 2 kids, and instead of doing a suspension, right? You suspend the kid, you send them home, then they're not learning. It doesn't work, right? So they have them go into those and do those kinds of same activities, and they've shown that it's more impactful than a suspension. It does more benefits for the school, for the kids, etc. So I find it interesting how that's worked inside an organization too.
And in my own work, sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just not going to work, and it is what it is, and then you have to figure something else out organizationally, whatever. But at least you go through the process, so it's not getting to the point where people start quitting, yelling at each other. I can't deal with this. It's sort of a process to try to deal with these issues. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but it's a process at least that's structured, and can attempt to address some of these issues.
I really like the first one that you brought up, that idea of before you start a meeting, just having that personal connection where people can talk about, it's not just about the work, but about who we are and how we are. And it was making me think of an article that Lauren sent to all of us that's in Harvard Business Review. I think it's this month.
Yeah, it was this month. Yeah.
November, December. Yeah, on loneliness. And they'd done a study, and basically found out that the top 3 ranked interventions around how to help combat loneliness at work, like one of the first was just that taking 5 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to actually talk about each other, like giving that, they called it personal chit chat, right? And I thought, gosh, that's like a low cost, low hanging fruit, so easy to do. And how often have we all been in meetings where we're so task focused and productivity, and it's like the agenda's packed and we have no time just to say, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? What's going on?
Yeah.
And so I love the fact that you're doing it in your organization. And I wonder how many other organizations could benefit by just seeing the social connection as a driver to productivity versus an obstacle to productivity.
Yeah, that's the thing. I love that because, in research, they use words like, understanding that emotional support or, community is as important as the bottom line. The reality is it's hard to have one without the other. I mean, there are obviously cases where you can. There's a lot of, really bad organizations that make a lot of money by abusing people or whatever. That's a whole other conversation. But in general, the more connected people feel, the better they work together. Like, think in your times when you feel don't connected, you need to get something done, but that person, you're not in your flow. You can't you can't have a free. You're more stuck. Whether it's your personal life or private life, you're feeling, you're not gonna. So there needs to be a bit of a reframing, and I think it's always been important, but I think culturally, the organizational man, like that kind of, there's a cultural shift. And say what you want about younger workers, but there's a sense of what they want through forgetting about all the negative stuff. There's a willingness and an unwillingness based on some sort of real inherent belief that they have. I don't really know what it is. Every generation is different, but they're not going to play the same game, especially ones that are going to be great. And so anything, they want connection. They don't want to deal with bullshit. They're not going to stay in the same job for 3 to 5 years like we all used to do because
Do
which
your
is
time. Yeah.
right. They want to move. They want to get engaged. They have almost more important than money. Well, I'm going to take that back, but they want to, they need that, and
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
need. Otherwise, you're going to constantly be hiring people, and it's not going to work for an organization because we
Mm-hmm.
love the pain of that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So I love what we're talking about, and I'm curious about how you factor in psychological safety
Oh,
into what you're talking about, Adam.
Well, so the come clean process is you say no, right? There's always individual agency. And the thing that's, sort of like in another life, I have this, I mean, I use it, but I tell this to people I work with all the time. When I'm asking them to do something, we're having a conversation. I say, if you're a yes, say yes. If you're a no, say no. And if you're a maybe, say no. You can always change your mind later, right? So I invite Naomi to this come clean. Naomi can say no. And then, in this sort of workshop I've done, I've said, then I would say to Naomi, thank you for taking care of yourself. Right. So it's not a rejection on me. Naomi's taking care of herself. Right. And the reality is, Naomi and I will never get through whatever we're going through unless I can take a no as well as a yes. Right. Because
Mm-hmm.
then there's not a relationship, right? Because there's not a flow. So personal agency is everything. And again, for the individual 1 minute, it could say, I had a great dinner last night. Everyone has different levels of
mm.
what they want to share or not. Those are called
Mm-hmm.
human boundaries. So
Mm-hmm.
another person may talk about, I broke up with my boyfriend, it really sucked, blah, blah, blah. Another person say, I ate lasagna for dinner last night.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
different in that
Mm-hmm.
regard.
Yeah.
So
To me,
just
no,
let
go
me
ahead, Nina.
just let me
Uh-huh.
follow up on this one thing
Yeah.
because I think it's so important. What I love about what you just said, Adam, is that people have choice. When people have choice, that is such an important component to trust, respect, and psychological safety. So if I can, in your company culture, if it's okay for me to say no, that is so important. It really is. That ability to choose, critical.
Yeah, no, I think it's everything because otherwise there's no real relationship. And there's resentment is an inevitable part of being told what to do without a choice. It just is. It's human nature, right? So you may say yes and not like it, but you have the right to say yes. I don't really want to do it. I don't want to go away this weekend. My boss is a pain, but you've said yes, and you had the right to say no, or begin a dialogue to reframe it, right? So you have that choice, and yeah, I think it's everything.
Yeah, and I think I find it interesting. I've been doing some work around positive intelligence in, we often don't have control of things around us. But I find it interesting how you said, well, you said yes when you had to do all these things, but you didn't really want to say yes. You wanted to say no. And I think sometimes it's not only just about it, the culture, it's also about, what we bring to a workplace organization, so in the positive intelligence sphere world, one of my saboteurs is the pleaser. So, I'm going to take on more than I can mentally handle because might be worried that, someone might not like me. And so I find that really interesting. The other thing I find interesting is that, you know, I feel like there's a huge like chasm here where I just don't see these giant companies, doing and paying attention to this, right? Because they all think it's about, oh, remote work. And the studies that they're doing are showing that that's not, that you can be at work and be just as lonely because of the things you're saying about the disconnect. But at what point is it the company's responsibility? And what point is it our own personal responsibility?
It's a hard one, right? Because companies are people and it comes down to individual people. And so one of the reasons I love the personal check-in at the beginning of the meetings is it not only it can shift an energy. So how many times have you gone to a meeting, you're still stressed from your last meeting or whatever's going on in your life? You show up at a meeting, you're in frenzy mode because whatever. So that couple minutes helps to reset your own clock, as you're not purposely doing anything, but just, you're not jumping right in to the, whatever. And so you have a little bit of time to shift energies. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of personal work it's basically, yes, it's really hard. So individual managers, individual people have to do that. And we're all not good at it. And I think the other thing, that a real cultural shift that has to happen, and again, it's very simple and it's very hard. And that is, we think we need to fix something, right? And listening is not enough, right? So Naomi's a coworker. I said, Naomi, whatever I say. Sometimes Naomi, because she's an executive, we're people that want to get shit done, right? She's my language. So she's going to try to solve my problem, right? That can create discord, and it doesn't always work. So instead, Naomi legitimate thinks she has a fix, and maybe she does. So Naomi said to me, hey, I might have something you can think about. Would you like me to share that? Again, that goes back to agency. I can say yes or no. So if I say yes, I've invited Naomi to share her thoughts, but I control it because I've agreed to it, right? Versus I tell Naomi something that's wrong. You should do this, you should do that, right? Then I'm like, don't tell me what to do. I'm not dumb, right? I'm gonna go into my defensive mode, and I'm not hearing it. Naomi just says to me, hey, I might have a solution, something you can think about. Would you like me to share it with you? Then it becomes a dialogue. I'm receptive to it because I've invited it. So that's a tool that I think all of us can use, right?
But don't you find that easier to be done when we're not at a heightened emotional state?
Yeah, I mean, my son growing up had, ADHD, and we went to ADHD camp, right? And there was like the antecedent, and basically, and once something goes into full on, you just got to let it ride, right? Because you're just closed. No one can hear anything. So, we don't live in a perfect world. So, once I think you have the understanding of these basic, I call it a discipline or whatever, right? These sort of simple tools, or these tools which sound simple but can be really hard. You practice, you nuance it. You're not going to always get it right, and sometimes they're not going to work. Right? It's just what it is. You have, there is some recognition that everything's not going to be fixed despite good intentions. And then I don't know, it's so great. I have a friend of mine, Anthony, who when he was in college, he had this friend, and she kept on wanting to hang out. She was annoying him, right? He made a decision not to be friends with her. Most of us would sort of like, I'm busy. We wouldn't sort of address it. And Anthony said to her, I don't want to be your friend anymore. She freaks out. Well, what's going to happen? This and that. What if I see you in the hallway? If I see you in the hallway, we'll say hello to each other. Well, I'm going to feel so bad. Yes, you will feel bad. And he just addressed her concerns calmly. And that I learned so much from that lesson. I thought it was brilliant, right? You address something, you deal with the moments of uncomfortability, and you move on. Most of us would just be like, go through 3 years, going to a different hallway, or like,
I'm going to be the most person. I don't know if I could ever do that.
No, I think I think that that's incredible, and is an incredible exhibition, if you will, of maturity, emotional maturity.
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say that at this point in my life, I'm more inclined to be able to do that than to say, run away or hide behind the tree, which I certainly have done in my life, for sure. I'm like, oh my God, there's that person in the store. Okay, I'm going to go down the other aisle really quickly, hide behind the cereal boxes. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
When I had my restaurants, if I didn't want to deal with I didn't want to see people because they were all over the city, and I'm in the city, right? So I would literally, there's a place on First Avenue in 75th Street. I'm walking down Fourth. At 77th Street, I'd go to Second, walk down 7, cut back to First to go to First and 62nd where I had to go, instead of saying, hey, how you doing? Or, whatever it is. So, and I'll just throw in one thing here. For those, I've been in recovery for over 20 something years now, right? And there's one saying, which I think is really applicable. And it says, none of us are perfect. We're not going to do all of this right. It's a practice of, practice, not perfection. So none of us are going to do all of this right. And that's
Right.
just because we're humans, right?
Mhm.
But we practice, and then we have little wins because something sort of went better. We have a little notch. It creates a little bit of, another level of competencies or confidence or however you want to frame it, right? So we practice. And sometimes when we practice and it doesn't work, we feel good that we took the action, right? So it's really about us taking these individual actions um, to become better. We're not going to be perfect. We'll be dead before we're perfect. It's human.
Mhm.
What I love about
Mhm.
that, Adam, is this idea of like when we think about loneliness, then it's not just a problem that's just us or outside of us, that it's both. And that we have this ability to advocate for ourselves, to take safe risks, to try new things, but also to set boundaries. And that also there's things that leaders can do and organizations can do to
We
help
have to
combat it
address
as
it as
well.
a culture because, to the earlier point, heart disease, anxiety, depression, early death, dementia,
Mm-hmm.
everything negative, not, there's certain things,
Right.
but a lot, basically, when you're chronically lonely, there's unfortunately a negative effect. And some of that is diminished ability to sort of function as well. And so then it becomes, really acute. And
Yeah.
so we need to learn how to address this. Individually, I think it's really, really hard. We need to make an effort, and it's really hard to do, right? Because you
How
have
do
to
you,
like go, I'm sorry.
no, as a leader, as an organization, how do you think that they can recognize loneliness?
I think it's becoming more and more recognized since COVID. I think our Surgeon General now, who was the Surgeon General under Obama, that stated loneliness is the number one health crisis facing our country. He's written books about it, disconnection. I think that's been really, really important. I think we're at this really weird time because there's a general recognition of the destigmatization of mental health issues in general and the understanding of emotional support on one side, and yet the sort of backlash of DEI and wokeness and a lot of these companies that have made great strides. The diversity officers are getting fired on a board level. They're taking out all the ESG goals that they once had. So it's really tricky.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
Adam, I know Mel and I know Naomi. We are all like so fascinated. We could probably sit here for 2 or 3 more
Oh, for
hours.
sure. We can keep going.
We could keep going and talking about this. It's such a great topic, and we really appreciate you taking the time today. So we're just going to kind of start to wrap things up. We've got one last question that we ask all our guests that we come on, and it's the last question is that what is one thing, because you've listed a lot that every leader could do, like starting now, like they get done watching this podcast and they walk out their office or on their way to work and they say, okay, what's the one thing that they could do?
As they pass someone, if they're in a physical office, say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Whatever, just literally something that simple can have a very meaningful effect. If you're working remotely like I do for and have for years, Slack someone, you text someone saying, hey, just thinking about you. You know, I remember the meeting last week, you did something really well. Very, very simple stuff. It's really as simple as that. And I think the problem is we're all too smart for our own good. And we think everything has to be so complicated. And the reality is it's very simple, but simple doesn't mean easy, right?
Mhm.
Well said.
Yes,
Well said,
absolutely.
Adam. Thank you
Absolutely.
so much. We've
Yeah.
really enjoyed you today. And I don't know. I see a sequel in the future.
Yeah,
I'm in. I'm
yeah,
in.
Absolutely.
Have a
yeah.
wonderful day, Adam, and thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy day.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much,
Thanks,
Adam.
Adam.
Thanks,
Bye,
Adam.
everyone. Bye.
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 Oh my gosh, she
I
was
could
so
keep
awesome.
talking all day. There were so many places we could go in that conversation. Like Naomi, when you started talking about psychological safety, I was like, yeah. And then we could talk about empathy and emotional intelligence of leaders and how that comes into play, and so many places we could have gone.
Oh my, yeah,
So,
because I
and
really went
yes,
down to that trust thing too. Like I really wanted to go down that rabbit hole. But
Oh
I was
yeah.
like,
Mutual
no.
trust, win-wins. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think to me, one of the most, one of the things that really jumped out is his understanding how important it is for people to be able to set boundaries safely and to be able to say yes, and to be, more importantly, to be able to say no. And a maybe is a no, and you can come back and revisit. I I think that that is a highly underrated kind of component to a productive culture, right? How many of us have worked in organizations or coached or done OD work for organizations where to say no, it's like
Oh
nobody
yeah,
can say no, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So that sense of having choice and having agency is fundamental, and you don't hear that too often.
Well, that goes back to, the things that we know, like the neuroscience that we've learned with leadership, and
Yes.
we think about David Rock's model and that whole autonomy
Yeah.
portion in motivation, and we often think, oh, autonomy in tasks, but it's not just that. It's having that choice. Autonomy is about choice, right? And having the ability to be able to say something, but we're so afraid. I mean, most people, I mean, I've always admired people who could say what they're thinking and feel safe to say it. And because, having been laid off 3 times, each time I got less and less comfortable with, what is it that I can say now and not say now. And I think that, we've got so much going on. We've got AI coming into the workplace. People are fearful, like how their jobs are going to change. Are they going to be able to do their jobs? Are they going to get fired because AI is going to take their job? And now you're going to add on to this whole idea of giving people the permission to talk and say and think. It's simple but complicated.
For me, it really feels like it kind of comes back into like culture and like
Hmm.
like the safety that we build in cultures, right? So, like to Naomi, to your point, it can be really easy to say no, or it can be really hard. And that's really not just based on who you are, but the environment that you're sitting in, right?
Hmm.
And whether that is
Hmm.
encouraged or not.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and the other thing I was really struck by is if we think about the Gallup work, we all know this, that how
Hmm.
important the direct leader is. And I thought about that, right?
70% of engagement
And
directly tied
right.
to
So
your
like if your
supervisor.
leader encourages
Hmm.
conversations with you, if your leader
Hmm.
prioritizes social connection in
Hmm.
meetings, and
Hmm.
sees it as an avenue to productivity versus an obstacle, like how does just at that level, even if you're working in a really large organization and maybe you feel like you can't control that,
Yeah.
gosh, I bet you can figure out your team or your coworkers,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I
There's
mean,
right. What's your span of control and what can you do? And all of this is we've seen it in the Gallup research. We've seen it in um, uh, vital learning. What is it? Crucial learning, right? Crucial
right, crucial learning.
conversations.
Yeah,
Crucial
crucial
learning. I mean,
conversations.
in Marcus Buckingham's work, in all there are some universal threads,
Yeah.
right? Around completely universal threads around how to create um, productive cultures, right? Because that's really what we're talking about, right? How do we create workplaces that allow people to show up authentically, do their best work, have opportunity to do what they do best, etc. And at the very least, we know, take the name of our podcast, Best Friends at Work, right?
That's
How
right.
important it is to
Make
have at
connections,
least one
you know.
right? At least one person that you feel totally safe with, that you can go and vent to, and and they don't need to feel like they need to fix anything. And that's the other thing that really struck me about what he said, because it's so
Mhm.
true, and we all know it,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes the most important thing, the only thing you need is for someone to be able to listen and be
Mm.
fully present and
Yeah.
not try to fix you and not feel Like they have to
Yeah.
offer you a sandwich because,
Brene
they
Brown.
feel
I love that
sympathy for
reference.
you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we're all
all of
coaches.
that.
I was gonna say,
Go
Naomi,
ahead.
building that, like how many times have we all had a client say, wow, I don't have any time during the week where anyone actually listens to me, where I can just talk,
Yeah.
right? We've all experienced that where, you know, clients at the end of a coaching session realize that that's the only space that they actually have to talk without judgment.
Oof.
Absolutely.
Oh my
And
gosh, wow.
I will
Right.
tell you something. For me, I'm a fixer. That's, and it's taken me a long time to understand, for example, with my longtime partner, we've been together for 37 years. When she would come home and talk to me about things that were going on at work, I would sit there and my immediate reaction was to give her suggestions for how to fix it. And not only did it not work, it created more tension in the dynamic that we had. And it took me a while, really, unfortunately, longer than it should have to understand that what she really needed was to just be heard and then for me to ask, do you want me to give you some suggestions? And she could say yes, or she could say no. And now that I'm able to do that, much less tension around those kinds of things. So, but it took me longer than I wish it had taken me to
You
get
know
out of
what?
that
It took the
mindset.
time it was supposed to. You know what I find interesting about what you're sharing, Naomi, is the idea is that I think what also happens in many companies are the microcultures within the big cultures. So I would think about our
Mhm.
team, right? I tried to create a place or a space with our team that we could, you know, if too much is on your plate, please say, or, find those opportunities to visit and, have that, connection, even with people whose personalities may not necessarily be copacetic, right? And when we were doing, and Mel, you've seen this too, when we're working with clients and you've got those highly engaged leaders, the leaders that are in that top quartile of engagement. I think a lot of the reason behind that is because they have created that, that safe space. I mean, the number one question on the Gallup poll that's related to all the other questions is my opinions matter at work, or my opinions count at work. And close seconds, number 5, my supervisor, someone cares about me. At our last job with Naomi worked together, number 5 was the number one. Someone cares about me. And I'm thinking about what Adam had to say and his company, Cuddle Us, where, platonic hug. We've gotten wildly away from that because of sexual harassment issues and allegations. Like we can't even, like, you try to make personal connections and then people are still afraid even in that environment too. I don't know. I'm starting to ramble because all of a sudden I'm seeing I'm seeing
Yeah.
like this idea, so many variables.
The other thing that came out
Mhm.
to me, Naomi, is you were just to build off your point is as we think about, and I know both of you have seen this because you work so much in leadership development, is as we think about how we develop leader cohorts in organizations, we often don't spend enough time helping leaders to think about that how they now create value and impact is different because you often get promoted into leadership because you're a
Mhm.
really great individual contributor.
Mhm.
You know the
Absolutely.
answer to things, you get stuff done, right? And so it's this explicit, repetitive conversation that needs to happen that, your opinion can't be so strong that it quiets other voices or quiets dissension, right? So you have to think about asking questions more. You have to think about it's not just you getting it done, but how do you enable the system around you to get it done? And it feels like I certainly see this in the work that I do with leaders, and I'm sure both of you do, that can sometimes still be a switch because when people get under stress, they go back to what got them there in the first place, which
Mhm.
was their ability to know the answer, their ability to get it done themselves, and
Mhm.
helping them to recognize those tendencies that worked for me till I got here, but now I need to pull on other things because that will
Mhm.
get me
Yeah.
short-term results.
Yeah.
But your point, Lauren, in the long term, from an engagement perspective, that I'm going to disengage the people around me over the long term if I keep.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Well, and it
Yep.
goes right back to Number one, when you're promoting someone, are you promoting them for the right reasons? Are they a good leader, or are they a good executor and doer of things, right? Two different
Yeah.
two different competencies, right? And then B, if they're not good at leadership, how do we promote and expand the roles of people so that they're seen maybe as leaders, but they don't need to be people leaders? And I think that's really crucial as well. And and for people to realize, hey, I'm not a people leader. I just like doing this, but how can I move up in my career? And I think there's a little bit of a stuck pattern there.
Yeah,
Those
I
are
think that's a whole, oh,
Whole
I'm
other
sorry. I
topic.
think that's our, that is a whole other topic. It
You're right.
is, and one that we really should discuss, because I think a lot of organizations and companies really have not learned how to manage that well.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
transition and setting up a system and a structure wherein the only way to advance your career is there's more than one way to advance your career. It's not just becoming a leader, right? There are other avenues
Yeah.
to, one, expand, and two, make more money. So it's a whole other topic.
I know. So just to circle back, before we all head out for our wonderful event here today, Adam was an awesome guest. Naomi, thank you for suggesting him and having him come on.
Thank you.
I think all of the companies, all organizations in it, obviously we always say it starts at the top. They need to take it seriously. And even this Harvard Business Review article, I think, was really important. Myth number one is that it's up to the individual, not the companies, and that it's not remote work either. That's not the problem. So cool.
You know what? We should put that in the show notes. We should link to that article.
Great idea, Mel.
Yeah. And also, I think I just want to sort of close the loop by giving a little promotion to Adam's companies, because I really do think that they're very innovative, and they really are looking at a private sector solution to some social sector issues. So hearme in particular, he is really looking at collaborating with Medicare to provide the service to people who are being discharged from the hospital. And he also fostered a collaboration with an organization called SAGE, which is an organization that supports LGBTQ plus elders. And so that that loneliness is a really significant issue for that population. So he's really doing some great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that he could, his work can bring such value to organizations. And then just imagine if organizations can help figure this out. That's magic, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Thanks,
Hugging
everyone.
my
You guys.
virtual hugs to
Virtual
my
hugs.
best friends at work. Have a
Absolutely.
great day and have a wonderful weekend, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Until
Bye,
next time.
guys.
Until next time. Bye.
Thank you so very much for spending some time with us. We hope you got something out of this episode. Now, if you liked it, do us a huge favor and take a moment and hit the like button. Did you do it? Thanks. Now, are you curious about who is next? Well, then please subscribe to the podcast. It'll help our channel so very much if you do choose to subscribe. Because, of course, the more subscriptions we get, the more opportunities we have to scale up our production, the types of guests we can have, and overall improve on what we can do to make the experience you want and might need. I feel like I sound like a public radio station fundraiser right now. Well, I guess that makes sense because we want you to come back again. So hit that subscribe button. It's super easy. Thanks so much, and we can't wait for you to join us for our next episode of Best Friends at Work.